Oh shit. Is it is it time again? Is it time again to make a new video? How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to a new video. I know it's been a while. I had to write some university exams and had to deal with some stuff, but I'm back. I hope you didn't mind the break on my channel. But yeah, today I'm gonna bring you a new video. I thought, why shouldn't I talk about the campaign that I prepared and that I'm currently running with my players, which is called Veil of the Eternal. So yeah, I'm gonna tell you about how I came up with the idea for my homebrew campaign, how it went so far, and what I'm planning for the future. Not all in this video though. I will probably make it a series because it is kind of a big campaign that I have planned. It actually should go from level 1 to 20, hopefully. We'll see, but it's a very long, epic campaign kind of thing. So if you're interested, keep watching. Also leave me a subscribe down there so you won't miss any of my campaign storytelling, I guess. And yeah, let's begin. Also, if you're one of my players and you don't stop watching now, I will find out.
And you will die in the next session.
I'm just, just for you to know. So let's go back in time. Back to when I was very new to Pathfinder 2nd edition. Back then, I just got some books, was reading through the core rulebook, and I decided to make my first campaign a homebrew one. That is mostly because I don't really like to run adventure paths or pre-written campaigns. I just have a bit of a struggle with managing pre-written stories when I don't really know them myself. So when I read into an adventure path, I always have some open questions that don't get answers right away. And maybe they get answers later on, but for that moment, I just don't feel very confident about it. So I always just prefer to come up with my own story. Of course, I used a lot of pre-written content, you could say, of the Pathfinder 2nd edition world and the lore of it, the characters and all of that. But I think that is just way more graspable. Like when you have a certain person you want to have as a villain, for example, you can look him up, you can find every information about him, you kind of get an idea of how he would react to things, but that's just way easier to kind of adapt to than a whole pre-written story. But the first thing I actually did was get some story writing advice from the internet, from people I know. For example, many of you will know him, How to Be a Great GM on YouTube. He makes a lot of good videos about storytelling, GMing and that stuff. I watched a lot of his videos just to get a bit of, like I said, storytelling advice. I don't know if I got it from him, but I did read about it somewhere. One pretty good advice that I actually used was to write the story backwards, at least to some extent. So you first come up with what you want the story to end with. What is the big climax, the big dramatic ending to the story, the big showdown with the big bad evil guy, for example. So that was actually something that I did. But don't get me wrong here, I didn't write the whole story from the end to the beginning. I just tried to figure out what would the bare minimum of structure be of the story to work in favor of the story I want to tell. But first, of course, I needed to decide who would be the villain. And I did that by having a look at the World Guide of Pathfinder. Oh, sorry. I just slapped that microphone, god damn it. But yeah, the World Guide is actually pretty handy when you want to find out about certain regions. Of course, it has all the locations summed up. And if you want to find out where you want your campaign to start, where you want it to take place or something like that, this book is really a very good go-to, I would say. And yeah, I've read about some nations, what people live there, and I found one nation in particular that was very interesting to me. And this nation was Razmiran, the evil theocracy run by Razmir, the living god himself. Of course, I had to think about how I want my campaign to feel like, how I want to run it. There are, of course, very different types of games you can play. You can have kind of a light-hearted, funny campaign. Of course, this one is light-hearted, this one is very serious. Of course, you can have funny and light-hearted moments in a serious campaign and vice versa. But just as an overarching tone, how do you want it to feel like? Should it be a very combat-oriented, bloody campaign? Or do you want it to be very non-combat oriented, maybe very social, very much focusing on intrigue, something like that? But when I thought about it, I just wanted it to be like a grand epic campaign with a very focused storyline, which is not leaning into railroading, of course. I don't want that. Basically, I want it to be a living world where you really can grasp everything that is happening in the world around you. You have a lot of influences from neighboring countries and maybe events that can happen in the world, but I also wanted to have a streamlined storyline that happens even when you don't follow it. So Razmir in this case, of course, would have his own goals, and he would try to gain power over the course of the story. But if the players don't decide to follow that storyline, or don't follow the hints to maybe find out what he's actually going on about, he will, of course, have a bigger chance of success. But of course the players can do whatever they like, because I don't really want him to be streamlined into the story. I'm not really a big fan of that, but I also wanted it to have a very good narrative. So I guess if you want to sum it up, I wanted a realistic and immersive world with a very focused narrative, and this all should take place in kind of a realistic, immersive and not comedical kind of way. But of course, like I think every campaign there ever was, it will have its funny moments, it will have its sad moments. You kind of need that variation of emotions in your game, I think, and I didn't want that to not be there, you know. But yeah, now we have the villain, we have the overall tone of the game we're aiming at. So what do we do next? And be warned, there will be serious spoilers for the Pathfinder 2nd Edition lore, you could say, especially regarding, well, of course, the subject of the campaign that we've talked about. So if you don't want any of the Pathfinder 2nd Edition lore to be spoiled to you, you better stop the video now. Also, I can make sure that I don't have comments in the section down below where people are writing,
What the hell, dude? You spoiled the whole story of Pathfinder 2nd Edition to me. I can't play it ever again.
which would be kind of hard to spoil the whole lore of Pathfinder 2nd Edition as a whole in this video, but just a reminder. So the thing about Razmir is that he's not actually a god, he's actually just a very powerful wizard pretending to be a god. So with that info in mind, of course he would have to make sure this wouldn't get out, because otherwise I think most of his priests would see him in a very different light. He would need to make sure to stay alive and to gain more power, because that's actually just his normal goal that he tries to do over the whole time. But as I said, I wanted to try the method where you kind of write the story from end to beginning. So with it being a very grand and epic campaign, I of course wanted to have a very grand and epic boss fight at the end, or a confrontation, or whatever it will turn out to be. I don't know that yet, because, well, there's just too many variables that go into that. Just don't think about it. But yeah, I kind of thought about just Razmir in his grand cathedral, in his grand temple, just hovering in front of a big mosaic window with his mask on. The players enter. Over the course of their discussion, he turns down the mask. They see his face for the first time. Then maybe, you know, those are just all things that will be depending upon what will happen before that. I don't know yet. Maybe they'll see his face before that. But that's just how I figured it out in my mind, just to make a cool scene in my head, how it could turn out. So they brought all their allies, they fought the state of Razmiran just to get in their face Razmir, and Razmir will throw all kind of spells at them. In my head it's working pretty good, but of course there's not really too much sense in figuring out how that will go, because that's probably at about level, I think I checked it out at once, maybe they should at least be level 16, 17, 18, something like that to face Razmir. So well, right now I think we're at level 2, so there's still a lot of time to go. But yeah, that's just how I figured it out to be. And going further to the beginning of the story, I had to figure out how would they get there. In Pathfinder Legends, actually, it's also noted that there could be an ongoing, well, kind of pact between Razmir and the Whispering Tyrant, where Razmir delivers all his dead to Tar-Baphon. You don't really know what he gets from that, maybe just immunity from him. But yeah, I also wanted to keep that in mind in my story, because I also, how it turned out now, have 2 players that are actually bonded towards the Knights of Lastwall. One is actually a member straight from the beginning, and another one is trying to become a member of the Knights of Lastwall. So that is something that kind of turned out to be. But even before that, I had that in mind, so I wanted to maybe not be quite sure who is the main villain. Is there one main villain? You have Tarbafon, who's just throwing undead, and you have Razmir, who's just a way more calculated, more civilized approach of a villain, you could say. But both should be very intimidating in this campaign, and it shouldn't be quite clear who is the main threat and who to focus on, really. But before thinking too much about that, what would the players have to do before approaching the main villain? I actually want to give them a lot of opportunities to gather allies in the course of the campaign, because I kind of like this element in campaigns where you just can befriend people, have interesting relationships to other NPCs, and get a gathering around you who can become pretty helpful in the future. Also, this just leads to way more interesting social encounters. You have way more intriguing relationships, and I like my games to not just be players as a group go somewhere, they destroy everything in their way, then they go somewhere else, maybe get a bit of help for one session, but then they move on and fight everything somewhere else. I just like it to be more overarching, even regarding NPCs. So yeah, they find an NPC they can talk about and befriend, and let's be honest, it's never the NPCs that you described on your preparation notes or anything. Most of the time players just say, is there anyone named Bob? And then you make someone be called Bob in there, and they just will fantasize about him for the rest of the game, but that's something completely different. We won't get into that this time. If they just find the Bob that they like and he helps them for a session, maybe just make those characters reappear over the time. You don't have to have 100 NPCs that are thrown away after each session, because they won't appear after all, but you have way more interesting characters, interesting relationships of the characters to your players, and it just goes along with a very good storyline, I think. But it shouldn't all be about gathering allies. I also, of course, wanted the villain to have a lot of henchmen that would have to be stopped, killed, destroyed before even getting to the villain. In case of Razmir, of course, that would be his fellowship of priests. He even has some special henchmen, I think. I'm not quite sure. I think there's like one woman priest that kind of kills all the heretics around Razmir or something like that. Not entirely sure on that right now. Those are just all info I got in the back of my head for one moment where they might appear. I'm just very far away from that. But yeah, they would have to fight henchmen before that. They gather allies. And of course, they will have to do a lot of side questing that might not always be related to stopping the villain, because it would be kind of boring if just everything the players as a group had to do is just stop actions of the villain or his henchmen, because you kind of want some variation in there. Razmir will of course have to appear at some point, so yeah, like I said, all this that we just talked about is just some bare minimum of structure for the story, but at some point I wanted to become a bit more concrete, and as there is info about Razmir, actually it was kind of his origin story, you could say. Razmir actually took control over his first lands by demanding I think it was a mayor, to step down or to obey him, become a believer of Razmir. And as he refused, he just began raining meteors on the city, completely razing it and destroying it. And I thought, why not adapt that and have a similar scene be his first entrance as the villain? So the players would be in a city or in a village or whatever, and Razmir would approach with his fellowship of priests in a big row, like an army stepping towards a city, and he would just demand in a booming loud voice, maybe even his face would appear in the clouds in front of the city. That's actually what I'm thinking about right now. So his head would appear there, and in a booming voice he would demand the surrender of the city within, I don't know, 3 days or something. And the players will have to figure out something. I'm not sure how it would play out. I'm not really thinking about it too much, because I think it will be very interesting to find out how they would react to that. So I don't want to write it down, because I think then I will kind of tend towards making the thing that I wrote down happen. So I want to be open with that. But yeah, that is my idea on how to introduce him to my players. But with that being his entrance into the story, I didn't want it to actually be the first time anything related to Razmir happening. So I kind of thought about how is the campaign actually starting, And I wanted to make that plot hook in the first session already be related to Razmir and his goals without the players actually noticing. So I wanted it to make kind of a mysterious happening that is going on, but in the end they will find out that it's actually all related to Razmir and his evil scheming and planning actually. So what could that be? Well, with Razmir actually being not really a god, he kind of has to make sure he stays alive. And there is actually also a note in the Pathfinder notes, I think, where Razmir actually tried to get hold of the Sun Orchid Elixir, which is a potion that just reinvigorates your life force. It makes you live longer, basically. But when he tried to buy it from the seller, he couldn't, because I think even the seller was like, Razmir, you want to buy this elixir? Nah, bro, you're not getting it from me. So with not being able to get it legally, he would try to get it illegally. So I came up with a story involving the Sun Orchid Elixir. I was thinking about a merchant in Green Gold in Kionin, which is the land of the elves, if you didn't know. A human merchant, a very influential and rich person, who tries to prolong his life because all his friends in Kionin are elves. Maybe even his romantic interest is an elf, and he's just very old and dying right now, and he wants to get this Sun Orchid Elixir, well, to keep up with the elves regarding his age actually. But to get the Sun Orchid Elixir, it would of course have to get there in the first place, so it would have to cross the inner sea by ship, then go by caravans up north through Druma to Green Gold. But I thought it would be more interesting for it to not be a big, well-guarded caravan, but just one person transporting this elixir, so it won't stand out of the crowd and no one would even know he's transporting it. But this one person would of course have some more agents following him to make sure he doesn't lose it on the way, but he maybe wouldn't even know about that. He would just be having a contract to transport it there, then someone is spying on him. Maybe that person would even have someone spying on him. Of course, there would be a big interest in keeping the Sun Orchid Elixir, but of course, as it turns out, kind of got stolen on the way. But yeah, that was kind of the idea. So this one person would actually be part of a caravan from Druma to Kionin, and after looking into that, that would also kind of fit into the overall storytelling. It also would fit into the lore, because Druma is actually trying to get some new and fresh trading connections to Kionin after they kind of opened up to the neighboring countries, because they were even more isolationist before. Now Druma has an interest in creating more trading routes to Kionin, so they would be in one of the pioneer caravans from Druma to Green Gold, and as it turns out, all the players were part of this caravan as well. Wow, who would have expected that? That is basically how I came up with the story of my campaign. Maybe tell me what you think about how I came up with it. Of course, it was kind of a piece-by-piece experience, getting to find out about all the characters and the story that could have happened there. But I'm pretty confident about it. I think it kind of fits very well within the Pathfinder 2nd Edition lore. The info that I found out about all the nations, all the people. So yeah, I'm really impressed with myself in that matter. So yeah, regarding that, in the correct order, Razmir steals the Sun Orchid Elixir from a caravan that the players are also a part of. They do tons of other stuff. They later on find out that actually Razmir did it. They encounter Razmir. He will demand a big subjugation of a city or an entire nation for whatever reason. Actually, Razmiron also is in a war with Kionin at the moment, so that also really fit into the story. Then they will get allies. They of course will fight tons of undead on the side, because Tar-Bathon is throwing undead skeletons and zombies at them while they all do that stuff. And in the end, they come to Razmiron with their allies. Maybe they'll do some intrigue stuff. I don't know yet. We'll find out about that later on. It doesn't really make sense to figure that out right now, because like I said, there's just too many open variables. And they have a big epic fight with Razmir. Destroy him, kill him, whatever may happen. And this is my campaign that I come up with. I hope I could get you a cool insight into how I came up with all of that. If you liked it, leave me a like down there. Tell me in the comments, how do you come up with your campaigns? What are your methods? Maybe I can learn some cool methods from you. That would be very good. I'm always open for that. And yeah, of course, we will talk about the first session next time, on how Razmir's henchmen managed to get the Sun Orchid Elixir from the caravan. So if you're interested in that and don't want to miss that, leave me a sap down below. You can also find all my socials and stuff down there, just if you're interested. I really appreciate any support I can get from you. Thank you. And yeah, I don't think, is there anything left to say? Thanks for being patient as well. I know it took quite a time for this video to be released. I will try to make some more in the near future. I really appreciate any patience, any support you can come up with. And until next time, thanks for watching.